Blackman, Kallick is a Chicago-based public accounting and consulting firm. We serve mid-sized clients, both privately owned and publicly traded, in a wide variety of industries, including the food processing industry. We are one of 3 co-sponsors of this event today. We're also joined by Reed Smith LLP and Wells Fargo Bank. So we're the 3 sponsors. I'd like to thank my friends from both of those organizations for joining us and putting this presentation on today. Yesterday I was looking for the origin of the phrase, "May you live in interesting times." And it turns out it's uncertain what the origin of that phrase is. Many people think it comes from the ancient Chinese. But one of the things I did learn about that phrase yesterday was it was intended to be a curse. And that struck me as interesting. As we live in these interesting times, you might step back and say, well, yeah, a curse is about right. So anyway, with that having been said, living in interesting times, as we do right now, prudent business people think about risk management. Thus the theme of our presentation today. A little about the logistics of the morning. There will be 3 speakers today. Each one of them will have about 25 or 30 minutes to speak with you. After each presentation, the speakers will take questions, so make sure you're thinking about good and challenging questions to pose to our speakers today. Also at the end, we'll open up the panel and give you a little bit more time to pose questions to the speakers. So with that, time is precious and we appreciate you spending some of your precious time with us this morning, so let's get started. What I'd like to do now is introduce our first speaker. And his name is Stephen Baer. Stephen's a senior manager with our firm, Blackman Kallick, and he leads our risk and compliance services practice. Steve has over 10 years of experience helping his clients in a wide variety of industries and settings identify and manage risk as well as meet compliance requirements. And with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen Baer.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming, and thank you for allowing me to speak on enterprise risk management. I have the first presentation to give today, which is the wake-up crew, as I call it. So as you're waking up, we're going to talk about risk management. Also, if I speak quickly enough, maybe you'll still be eating and not ask any tough questions at the end. But really, if you do have a question, don't be afraid to raise your hand during my presentation. I'll be happy to field it, or we'll take some questions at the end. So what we're going to talk about, I'll give a brief introduction. Paul did a good job, so we'll go over that quickly. But we're going to start with the basics. We're going to talk about internal controls. We're going to talk about risk, talk about enterprise risk management as a whole, just to give you that basic education and understanding of that. Then we're going to talk about implementing it, because what good is it if you have the knowledge but you don't know how to put it into place? A hurdle that we see with a lot of organizations. And then after the short presentation, we'll take some questions and answers. And as we go through the morning, if questions come up, we'll be here at the end to field any additional questions. As Paul said, Blackman Kallick's firm, we specialize in a lot of industries. Food, the food industry is one of our specialties. One of the first things I noticed when I came to the firm is that we really do have that core competency, and that's something we provide great value to our clients on. Risk and compliance services, it's internal controls, internal audit, those sorts of things. That's what I specialize in. I've been all over the world doing this type of work. So I've seen things in China, Italy, Europe, Mexico, US. So I've been all over the place, working with internal controls, working with DRM, really bringing those best practices to a lot of my clients. So let's start with the basics. Internal controls. Internal controls is really defined, as it says here, from everybody within the organization's involvement in the day-to-day objectives that are trying to be met. So we're talking about the board of directors, or if you don't have a board, some kind of advisory panel that you have, all the way down to the employees that are doing the day-to-day functions. So internal controls involves everybody in the organization, and what it does is it helps us meet our objectives. And Institute of Internal Auditors, which is a strong organization on the internal audit side and internal control side, really talks about those three objectives from a compliance, operations side, and then also financial reporting. So there's three main objectives that they talk about. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about ERM and how it expanded that definition of internal controls and really brought it to focus more on risk and less internal controls. And I'll explain why. But basically, it involves everyone in the organization to help meet their objectives. And the whole point of today's discussion is you want to implement good internal controls, but you don't want to have to add bureaucracy. You don't want to add a headcount. You don't want to make spreadsheets and procedures and doing stuff just to make sure you're doing it right. You want to use existing processes, existing controls, and make the most of them, and that's critical. And so that's what we're going to talk about here. You can't talk about internal controls without talking about risk. And so when we define internal controls, we look back here, we're talking about meeting our objectives. And simply stated, risk is telling us that we might not meet those objectives. And the three objectives that we talked about originally under the definition of internal controls says there's operational, financial, and compliance. And ERM said there's one more. We have to look at strategic. You have to look at how you're going in the marketplace, how you're talking about your internal risk, your external risk, what your competitors are doing, how the industry views you as a company. And so the ERM model has expanded beyond just those three areas and said strategic is critical as well. So that's the definition of risk, the likelihood that your objectives might not be met. So what's affecting your organization from getting to a larger organization, so becoming a $500 million company, or becoming the second largest producer of your product, or whatever it might be. What's going to hinder you from meeting those objectives? So there's frameworks out there. Everything is a framework, right? So it started with internal control framework, and COSO, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, it's a conglomerate of 5 or 6 internal control, accounting, and finance people that all got together and said, we need a methodology that's out there that allows us to go in and do something in a very organized manner when we're talking about internal controls. So COSO was developed in 1995. In 92, so this is 7 years later, they came out with their first integrated framework. Obviously, the originals came out, the draft versions, but it was finalized in 92, and really it changed the way that internal controls are viewed because it did have a methodology. And so that's what people have been using for years and years and years. And Sarbanes-Oxley came along, and COSO got even more attention, and it became a very popular thing to talk about. It's kind of a cool thing in the internal audit world. But anyway, so COSO is kind of the leading methodology out there. There's other ones. Australia, New Zealand has one. Canada has something called COCO. There's all these other methodologies that are out there, but COSO is really the leading one. If you talk to any public company that has to go through Sarbanes-Oxley, they will tell you that they're following COSO. And then COSO said there's more to just internal controls than what we're looking at. Like I was mentioning, we need to expand on what we're talking about. So instead of having internal control focused methodology, they came out with enterprise risk management. And what the difference between internal controls are and enterprise risk management is it's not a new methodology, it's just an expansion of the current methodology that's out there. And it says, let's not only just look at internal controls to present risk, but let's see the risk and understand them, and let's understand what our risk appetite is. And I talk about risk appetite in the sense of there's multiple ways to handle how you view your risk. So if you identify a problem, a technology issue out there that may impact your company, there's a couple options. You can say, I'm going to do something about it. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to stop that activity. So there's all these options out here that the COSO ERM framework tells you to consider. And so even though it's just an expansion of the original internal controls framework, it's a 4-volume framework that's out there and very comprehensive.